I think what's really interesting is that this whole anti-Semitic thing just jumped off the rails here recently. It's just gotten crazy with everything going on in Israel and Gaza and really since 2023, I guess. But what are your thoughts on that about Matthew 24 and about the prophesied anti-Semitism? You think that we're seeing that now, the start of that?
Yeah, and I would say absolutely because what we know is, again, when we look at the portrait of the tribulation period, the 7 year period, the seventh week of Daniel, the day of the Lord, however, there's a lot of different names and there's a lot of nuances for sure in all of that. Um, we see that in the midpoint of the tribulation period, that the Antichrist betrays the Jewish people and then he seeks to annihilate them. And that's why, again, in chapter 24 of Matthew, verse 15, Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, let let the reader understand, flee. Let the one who's in the mountains, don't go back and get your coat. The things are in motion now for 100% genocide of what the Antichrist wants. Because prior to this, not only does, according to Second Thessalonians 2:4, he goes into the temple, declares himself to be God, and I think that coincides with him putting the abomination in the holy place, which is what Jesus
Yep.
said. So you have a consistency there. And when he does that, the Jews who had received him as Messiah before, um, they're not going to accept it. That's one of the reasons why they don't accept Jesus today, because for them, at least they're consistent. They will not recognize a divine Messiah. And so when this new Antichrist, this new Messiah, declares himself to be divine, they're going to reject that too. And so they're going to realize, hey, this guy betrayed us. And then not only that, so they're going to reject him. And then in his anger, he's going to seek to annihilate all of them. And Jesus said, "Get out, flee as fast as you can, and because you're not even have time to get your coat." And so, but let's also remember that when he seeks to persecute them, he's going to be the leader of a full worldwide system. And so it's not, we don't go from, this Mayberry, the Andy Griffith show, everything's wonderful, to evil the next day. What, all these things is the preparation, even the preparation for the coming persecution of the Jewish people starts now. This anti-Semitism, because you're going to see the Antichrist is, I think it's not just going to be him. His entire system is going to be based on being anti-Semitic. And so the people who take the mark and who are part of that, again, they're not going to go one day, oh, we just love the Jews, and then they're going to be brainwashed the next day into hating the Jews. No, all this anti-Semitism is going to be, the Antichrist is going to leverage that. So when we see this, especially during the second half of the tribulation, what we're seeing now around the world is it's ripe. It's ripe to be brought right into a legal anti-Semitism to persecute. And most countries, as we know, in our country, it's illegal. In many other countries, it's at least illegal on paper. But imagine when it becomes actually legal, like in Germany. I mean, you could go and you could shoot a Jew as a non-military person, and you would be overlooked at least. And so imagine that again, that mentality worldwide that the seeds of it are already here. And so when I look at scripture and I see those kind of passages about persecution or others, I just go, well, what we're looking at now is going to feed that when the time comes.
Sure. I like how you mentioned Germany. I think something people don't understand is that that was the exact same narrative under the Third Reich, under Nazi Germany. Was that it's the same thing you're seeing now? The Jews are behind everything. They own everything. You know, they're behind all the corruption. They're the world's problem. And you're starting to see that now more and more and more of that same narrative. It hasn't changed in, what, 70, 75 years. It hasn't changed. It's still the same. Um, I think what's also interesting is that, I mean, that's something else that we can point to, because I talk to people all the time. I got, family members, different people who, don't believe the same way I do. And I'll tell them, this is prophesied to happen. All this stuff that you're seeing, you may not want to accept it now, but just keep it in your back pocket, keep it in the back of your mind, hey, here's some things to look out for because the Bible says it's going to happen and that's our final authority. And so I hope it's an eye opener for some people, and I hope for whoever's watching this, like send it around. People can see that this is happening. Jesus said it was going to happen 2,000 years ago, and now it's happening right now. At least the foreshadowing of it.
Well, when you look around the world too, that's well said because the
Hmm.
we realize that anti-Semitism is it's satanic, um, and which means it's spiritual. Because right now, for example, since 2023 and Israel responded in Gaza, and we've seen all kinds of Hamas rallies around the world, anti-Semitism across all universities, especially during the Biden administration in 2024, other places, the UK, Europe, etc. All these like protests and other things against Jewish people. You see, of course, increased persecution and anti-Semitic behavior and violence. Well, some of these people show up and you'll be like, why are you here? And they're like, I don't know. I'm just here. And they really don't
Yeah,
know. And it's fascinating to me because, you know, for example, we see all the Christians being killed in Nigeria right now. It's horrible. I mean, it's just by the thousands, tens of thousands. And where's the protests? People aren't out there protesting about and protesting against the Nigerian government. And so you realize, well, what's the double standard? If you really cared about innocent people and you're so worried about the people in Gaza, I mean, at least there, if there are deaths, you have Israel passing out flyers and pamphlets and, hey, I know Hamas is going to sacrifice you, but don't let them use you as a shield. Okay, well, in Nigeria, it's just straight, just blood, murder. They're just absolute. And so, but those same people, they they don't go and protest that. So it makes you realize, why are they then only targeting the Jewish people? Because it's the world. And we know in 1 John 4, 1 John 5, the whole world lies under the power of the wicked one. And so he hates the Jewish people, and the world is going to hate the Jewish people. That's why if you just go back and look at the UN and you look at their condemnations of nations, just pull up a chart. They've condemned Israel, I mean, like 20 times to one over every other nation. You go, why are they only focused on Israel so much when you have China and Nigeria and others? It's because it's spiritual, and the UN is controlled by Satan. So, no surprise that you'd have a hatred there, this supernatural satanic hatred. And people out in the world, they don't know why they're there, but there's a spirit behind them controlling them, because they're certainly not saying anything about all other persecutions of other people in other places.
exactly. They're not even saying the same thing. They're not even consistent with the persecution of the Gazan people, which they claim, to care about so much. As soon as the ceasefire started to happen and this, Trump's peace plan started to unfold and Israel pulled out, Hamas just started, executing and,
Yep.
abusing their own citizens, and you didn't hear one word. And all the people that I personally know who are always posting about this, they're so upset about it. Not one word from anybody.
Yeah, it was only the Jews. If the Jews
Only the
did it,
Jews.
yep, you hear the phrase, Amir Tsarfati says it all the time, no Jews, no news. But again, that tells you there's a spiritual angle to this, and people need to ask themselves, who are they being led by here? Because this unnatural, irrational hatred for the Jewish people, um, what's the source of that? And it certainly is spiritual.
Exactly. What is the source of that? What voice in the world right now is the most anti-Semitic? And if you do the research on that, you'll find that that same voice is the same voice that's advocating for abortion, that's
Mhm.
advocating for same-sex rights. It's the same voice that is anti-God and anti-biblical on pretty much every single issue. They will take the side against God on every single issue, and they're the ones that are the most upset about this whole thing. I think that speaks volumes.
It, Again, if people are wondering, I remember during COVID, people were confused and they're like, what's going on in the world? And yet they didn't have the spiritual insight to truly understand, but they did have some sort of insight to recognize things are what is it? It's irrational. See, that's the thing, is that a lot of this hatred towards the Jewish people is, you look and go, man, why do the Jews always get it? And then of course the answer often is, like you said earlier, well, don't you know they control Hollywood? Don't you know that they control the banking? Don't you know they control the media? And you go, look, I can show you an absolutely wicked, unscrupulous Jew. I could show you a wicked, unscrupulous African. I could show you a wicked, unscrupulous Mexican. I mean, it's not just the Jews that are unscrupulous and wicked. Every nation has that. We're all sinners. And so, but it's interesting how there's a specific elevation. Again, that's the definition of anti-Semitism is when you generalize or you stereotype a certain group, and it's not just an individual, it's you give the whole group that sort of stereotype. And you go, hey, look, that's not fair in any regard. I can't say this about again, the Chinese or Asians or whatever, but again, there's a lack of rational thinking. There's a blindness there, and that's really the key. And the Bible says that, in 2 Corinthians 4:4, that the unbelieving world is blind. That the devil has blinded their minds not to understand, number
Yeah.
one, the gospel, but
Yep.
secondly, just spiritually minded biblical
Hmm.
truth.
The preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, and then they
Foolish.
don't see it. But what you were saying, I'll kind of build off of that. You were talking about how they're behind everything, behind the news. If they're behind the news, then why is all the news anti-Semitic? That makes zero sense. I mean,
It
almost
makes
every single major news outlet, aside from maybe Newsmax, News Nation, maybe Fox News, a few of them, very, very anti-Semitic. I want to read you an article that came out today. I thought I'd go into this here on the show. This was put out by the NPR.org. And it starts out with support for Israel among U.S. conservatives is starting to crack. Here's why. Red State America has been a big fan of Israel, according to Jackson LaMayer, an evangelical pastor in Oklahoma and founder of Pastors for Trump. Evangelical Christians in America, for the most part, not always, but generally speaking, have usually been very strong supporters of the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, he said in an interview with NPR. That support is deeply rooted in their evangelical faith, he said, but recently he has noticed the conversation around Israel is changing quite a bit, particularly online. Some very influential leaders, all of whom I like, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Marjorie Taylor Greene, have taken a very controversial stance in regards to the nation of Israel. Last week, Carlson hosted a prominent white nationalist named Nick Fuentes on his show. Although Carlson disagreed with Fuentes on his most anti-Semitic statements, such as American Jews are more faithful to Israel than they are to the United States, he did broadly align with Fuentes on his view about the country itself. I've always thought it's great to criticize and question our relationship with Israel because it's insane and it hurts us. We get nothing out of it. I completely agree with you there, Carlson said. And here's a stat here that came out recently that they put on this article as well on younger Republicans sympathize less with Israelis than older Republicans do. So respondents were asked, thinking about the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, are your sympathies more with the Israelis or with the Palestinians? Respondents who answered more with the Israelis, that would be 52% Republicans 35 years and older. 46% would just be all Republicans. Republican ages 18 to 34 was only 24%, and all respondents 22% for more with the Israelis. I think that's very eye-opening, but also very disturbing that you're seeing this among Christians. I mean, you would expect it from, like we were saying before, the preaching of the cross is them that perish foolishness. If you're not saved, you're not born again, you don't have the Holy Spirit living inside of you, then you're not really gonna see the spiritual side. But I think it's more sad when you have Christians who want to hop on that train and pull on the wrong end of the rope because they simply just don't know, or because they're, as I like to put it, spending their time with the wrong stuff, and they take their worldview from that. They take their worldview from social media instead of the Bible, which is, pretty sad. I think also pastors, man, I mean, pastors aren't covering it. They're not really talking about a lot of this. And I'm blessed to have an amazing pastor who does talk about this stuff and has been very firm in his defense of Israel and, supports it biblically. He's not just getting up and giving his opinion. He's showing, hey, this is what the Bible has to say about this. So I'm blessed, but a lot of churches, they kind of drop the ball on it.
Mhm. No, absolutely. I think it's interesting to me as well that you nailed it. You have pastoral really neglect in the churches, which again, number one, the second thing that contributes to that is simply just a lack of Bible teaching in the church anymore. There's a lot of self-help and topical stuff, and so you have that. Biblical illiteracy would be a good way to say it. I mean, 5/6 of the Bible is about Israel. There's a lack of understanding about Romans 9 through 11. There's this very specific reason that that section is in the New Testament. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, the idea of covenant theology or replacement theology. I know they don't like that term, but fulfillment theology, if we want to use their phrase. Um, their contribution to Israel not having a future, specific future in God's plan. And so, of course, you have that. But the other thing, too, I'm not surprised about the demographic in that one of the reasons why those that are older are a little bit more leaning towards Israel is because they simply have not only know history, but they've lived through history. They've seen the value of Israel's contribution in the world, in the Middle East, in their relationship with the United States, really from the 1970s on. So they see that they've been able to notice really the shaping of the Middle East as it relates to Iran, and their revolution. Not only that, the bombing in Beirut in the 70s as well. So when you are looking out at the Middle East, and you see, again, you understand in 2005 when Israel gave up the Gaza Strip, or going back to the 1993 Oslo Accords, Yasser Arafat, Bill Clinton, they've been around long enough to say, you know what, every time the Jews give up land for peace, it's never worked. And it's never changed. It never changed Yasser Arafat's perspective. It never changed Hamas's perspective. They never changed their Hamas charter. People can read it. Their goal is the obliteration of Israel, not from the river to the sea. May Palestine be
Yeah.
free. That's not code. They don't believe in two states. See, but the young person often, as you mentioned, number one, they haven't lived through history. They don't know it, but they get their stuff from social media. Well, so as we know, the legacy media, NPR, social media itself, is controlled by Satan. I mean, you want to talk about the
Yeah.
world. So when you get your news from the world, which is going to hate Israel, it's not going to put them in a favorable light. It's no surprise, again, especially if you don't know the Bible. So watching all this, the trend. Again, even with Tucker, I mean, I did a thing a few weeks ago on Tucker. Tucker had, as you know, he kind of ambushed Senator
Ted
Ted
Cruz.
Cruz.
Yeah.
And then Kirk Cameron, he made a few comments on it, and I addressed what Kirk Cameron had said. And I just gave a teaching on Romans 9 through 11. I was like, look, let's just get the Bible out. And it just, again, it shows you that the 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 historical church, really the Reformation church, which again would include the covenant theology and others, they have we're going back to Augustine. I mean, this goes back to this. Augustine was 400 AD, but even before him, they had to come to some sort of understanding of the Jewish people. But you look at others, and I have it on our website. The early church, Irenaeus and others, believed that the Jews were coming back to the land. They were going to build a temple, a physical temple. I have a whole history of church fathers early
Yeah.
on showing that they believed the Jews were coming back. So again, theological problems, intellectual problems, knowledge problems, age problems. I mean, these all contribute to the direction, and the trend is not going well.
No, it's not. It's increasingly getting worse by the day, but that's why I do what I do. That's why I'm trying to put this stuff out because they're not gonna a lot of them are not gonna get their information from the Bible, and that's sad. There's no excuse for that. But at the very least, if they're gonna get all their information online, then there should be good biblical information on any topic that's online that can be accessible to everybody. And um, I think also that if we take ourselves out of that space, then it's just going to get filled with a bunch of anti-Semitic stuff. It's just going to get filled with a bunch of stuff that's anti-God because, like you said, this is the world's media. Satan is the prince of the power of the air, or as my grandpa likes to say, the prince of the power of the airwaves.
It's
Everything that's
true.
going over the airwaves, it's who's controlling that? For the most
Who's
part, it's
controlling?
100% the devil. And there needs to be some good Bible believing stuff out there where people can get a hold of and be like, okay, now I get it.